Welcome to Hired the Podcast. As always, I'm Travis Miller, and I'm joined today by special guest for our first holiday episode, Fredrik Rydén, founder and CEO of Olis Robotics. And I know I didn't pronounce your name perfectly, Fredrik, but you told me that if your wife can call you Fredrik Rydén, then it's okay for me to call you Fredrik Rydén.
That is the general rule, yes.
Well, appreciate you being here very much. And since I'm surrounded by poinsettias, I guess my first question, Fredrik, Olis do anything fun or fancy for the holidays for your team?
Oh, well, so we are actually moving offices. So that's why, this whole workshop is going downtown Seattle to a different location. So we did not opt for a Christmas tree this year because we would have to take it down halfway through. So no, we did holiday treats for all employees. So we decided to send chocolates and things like that. Not too much stuff going on in the office.
Got it. And I'm curious, well, I'm sure with the move, it changes things, but do you have a philosophy or practice about hiring during the holidays? Do you think it's a good time to try and hire, or with everybody having so much stuff going on, does it kind of shut down for the company?
I think for us, we're hiring right now, right? So I actually think it's been a pretty good time. I mean, a lot of people are thinking, hey, what do I want 2024 to be like? So I think maybe Thanksgiving is a time for contemplation on those topics. So yeah, it's actually been a good time. And I think we're going to have someone up and running now in that new role, starting in January. So I think honestly, December and July, August are pretty great times to be interviewing because people are looking for that fresh start.
I also think you can put yourself at a bit of an advantage because there are a slight advantage because there are a number of companies that slow down hiring. There's a lot of traveling, executives taking time off, difficult to coordinate interviews, or companies towards the end of the year, if the P&L isn't where they want it to be, they'll go into a hiring freeze for the last couple of months. But we hear it all the time. We're slowing down right now, but come January, new budget, we're going to get ready to hire. So hiring is going to pick up in January, going to pick up in February. But people are still looking for work. I mean, it seems that layoffs have slowed down, but they're still happening. But I really think that now you can give yourself a little bit of an advantage if you can hire now versus waiting till January and February.
And as a company, we need these people to be starting in January. We're a small company. We got a lot of stuff going on. Urgency is one of our mantras. And, if we have to wait till March, that's going to slow a lot of things down. So, we got the need right now and we want them to start, as early, first week of January if possible.
Yeah.
Because it's more about hitting the ground running more than anything.
Yeah. Well, Fredrik, we jumped right into the Christmas tree from the start. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up where you are now, how you've built Olis Robotics, and what your philosophy is around bringing people onto the team and how you've accomplished it. That might be too big of a question. Let's start with Olis Robotics. How'd you get to where you are here?
Yeah, so I've been all this about remote controlling robots, remote monitoring robots, fixing problems remotely, not having to travel to solve simple issues. Basically, to alleviate a lot of the pain we see in automation with the cost of downtime and cascading costs, right? So but I've been remote controlling robots and done this for over a decade now. I started out as a fresh graduated PhD student at University of Washington. I was working with the Navy on a bunch of offshore projects, and ended up working with the offshore industry. So that's the oil and gas people and the renewable energy people, using Olis to actually remote control robots from shore, typically like in Scotland or something like that. Robots that were actually deep down in the ocean in the North Sea. So that means that people didn't have to fly out on helicopters to use robots. They could just drive to the remote control room on shore. And that's basically something that we kept working on. We ended up working with NASA, a bunch of government contracts. These were big, expensive projects, relatively small volume. And we recognized, hey, there's this big opportunity in industrial automation. So once we recognized that, and we decided, you know what, we got to start interacting with this community. We were like an R&D shop, like kind of very introverted. So we shifted and became very extroverted instead. I mean, a lot of interaction on social media, a lot of stuff going on at trade show, to really build a brand and tell the story about who we are. And because that's not something we do just to sell our product or just to educate people on our product. That goes for employees too. Like, we want people that join Olis to understand the vision. The vision is to be a catalyst for scale of industrial automation and do that by providing the best remote control experience. And it's very important that we get buy-in from the people that come and work for us on all those aspects. And that's not just for engineers. That's not just for salespeople. That's not just for sales engineers. We want all the people that work in operations on the back end, even people that are sorting out accounting. We want them to understand why we do what we do, such that can drive every decision. So I guess that was a long way of saying I think it's very important to be a clear communicator. Because you're not just selling to your customers, you're effectively selling to your employees. And we're a startup. We need to communicate this effectively to investors as well.
You talked about getting buy-in from new employees. How do you do that? Is it something that just comes naturally to you, or do you have a strategy for getting the buy-in of new team members once they join Olis?
I think I just try to be out there and talk about what I'm interested in, what I'm passionate about. And I think you just get a feel for if that resonates with the stakeholders that you're talking to, right? Do they believe in what you believe in? Because there is that, sort of common belief that you got to have, because otherwise there's challenges, especially in a startup. You're bringing something new to the market. There are going to be headwinds, right? So unless you have buy-in on those core ideas, it's just going to be hard to do the job well. How do I find out? It can be hard. I think interviewing it, there's a reason that you guys exist. Hiring and interviewing it is not a simple process, and it's certainly not bulletproof, right? At some point, you just got to go with your gut. You try to get, validation from others that might have worked with these people to understand who they are and what they're about. But ultimately, sometimes you just got to take a chance and go with your gut.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked a couple of weeks ago about creating a manufacturing environment that the newer generation wants to work in. And I think that's so interesting, because what I'm observing is that the newer generations, not that money isn't important, but it's not as important. The 80s yuppie Gordon Gekko greed is good philosophy is dead for the time for most people in the newer generations, and they're focused on where they work, what the work is, what they're working for, and who they're working with, and the compensation. Not that it's an afterthought, because everything's expensive now, but it feels like that's not important. How is Olis creating that manufacturing environment that the newer generations want to work in?
I think the key word is with. So you said, who are you working with, not who are you working for? Mm-hmm. I think that's the very first thing you got to think about. I think most people they're hunting for jobs these days are looking for a team to join. And you want to join the A team, the all-star team, and you want to be a part of that. You want to be a good fit. You want to be a solid contributor. I think that's the first step. I think we're way past the days where you can, think of people as wage slaves, if it's sort of derogatory, but you understand where I'm coming from. So that means, having a buy-in in the vision and mission of the company, but also having a say, maybe not the first week, maybe not the third week, but, after a while, you are going to be a valued and trusted member of this team, and you're going to have, somewhat of a say in the direction. Everyone on our team is the best in their company, in our company at something, So there's someone at Olis who is the best at the back end software that, runs, the embedded software runs on the box. And there's a robot experts, there's a sales expert, it's about taking ownership and knowing what your position on that team is, such that we can perform then as an all-star team. I think that's super important. The other thing, sorry to sidetrack a little bit, but I feel like it gets thrown around that manufacturers, like we're a tech company at the end of the day, we're a software company, but it gets thrown around that manufacturers, they need to reinvigorate themselves. They need to be so modern. They need to make sure to hit all these values. They need to be on social media. There's a lot of stuff they need to do, in addition to what they're already doing, which is like trying to make money and stay afloat. I think we ought to recognize this is a very challenging labor environment.
Yeah.
And you can be as appealing as a lemonade stand in the desert, but if there's no one around, there's not going to be anyone around, right? So I think a lot of these manufacturers might not actually be doing so bad. They're not doing as bad as they hear in certain, trade show discussions, right? Like they're talking about how can we be more appealing and all that stuff. Let's start by recognizing this is a very, very challenging situation for everyone. And you might be doing really well and still not be hiring.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything specifically you're doing to overcome the challenge?
Like I said, I think it's about, being really good about communicating who we are and what we do. The other thing I try to think about, I think of myself as relatively young, but if a young person joining Olis or any company for that matter, this sort of applies everywhere. If a young person joins our company, let's say they had my access and my resources, financial and people and all that stuff. What kind of company would they build? What would the modern version of Olis be? So that's kind of what I think about, because either I hire them and I take my company in that direction, or they are going to be my competitor in 5 years because someone is going to figure this out. So I try to sort of think about how would the best competitor for Olis look like, and what would these all fresh ideas look like, and how do I make sure that Olis become that company?
That's interesting. I've never really thought of it that way, is asking your people if they had the resources and backing that you have, and they were to create a company like Olis, what would they do? What would they do differently, more of, better? Because inevitably, if you don't do your best to create that company for them to choose to work for, they're either going to create it themselves or go work for a competitor that's doing it.
Yeah, and early on, we're still fairly smart. We're pretty nimble in what we can do, so we can be very competitive. And we're cognizant of the fact that as we grow, as we scale, we're going to become more mature, and we are going to become slower. So I want to make sure that for as long as possible, we can keep iterating and keep pointing our company in the most competitive direction possible. Because after a while, you're going to have to kind of settle in and decide who you are and what you're about. You're not going to change as much anymore. So I want to make sure we keep doing that as long as possible. And honestly, try to keep that culture for as long as possible as well.
With the challenging hiring landscape, has it changed at all what you're looking for in people?
First of all, the challenge hasn't been that great for us.
Okay.
There's actually a lot of people who are interested in working on sort of the latest and greatest tech, and we're really at the forefront of disruptive tech. Mm-hmm. So it's been great to find new teammates, willing to join and sort of share the vision and the mission for what we're all about. And it's like I can't really complain. And in fact, due to social media, we've been able to be quite pointed and really, because we're hiring remote across the U.S. as well, we've been able to, go across the country and target some really top talent for these positions, and I think that's a competitive advantage.
Is that a newer shift? Is that the reason for the move that you're going through? Yeah. Downsized office is actually part of it, and becoming more flexible.
We had people mainly in Washington State to begin with, and the hiring, we started hiring now in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and we're looking at probably adding another state here, like I said, early next year. So It's just we're trying to definitely shift and be more virtual, and it's not necessarily to save on office cost. It's actually to make sure that we can be present where our customers are, and being quicker to support them when and where they need us.
So how do you manage to that when you've traditionally had people in Washington close to the office, I'd imagine in office a lot of the time, and now you're downsizing, hiring people all over the country? How do you continue to focus on maintaining the culture that you developed and you talked about being proud of and you want to maintain for as long as possible? How does that shift your management and leadership strategy at Ideals?
I think it's actually easier to be fully remote, fully distributed, because that forces everyone to utilize the digital tools and make sure everything happens there. So it's not like, when we think about it that way, it's not like we're having a bunch of sidetrack discussions happen locally in the office. Like, no, everything we do, all the key decisions gets taken online. Even if people happen to be in the same office, they go on with headsets and their own screens and all that stuff. I think that's a key thing. So you don't have this sort of second degree citizens, right, sitting remote, and then you have the top brass sitting in person in Seattle. No, I think that's the key, to just like really level the playing field and commit to it. This is not something that was necessarily new to me. I grew up, as broadband was being rolled out. I wrote open source software with friends and across great distances when I was 13. So it's and that kept going on through high school and college, and then went and started working, and it was mainly in person for a number of years, then COVID and all that stuff. So for me, it's kind of been a return to what I thought of was a fun but odd way of working, and now it's funny to think that what I was doing in my room at my parents' house was the way we were going to work in the future. That's kind of hilarious.
Probably gotten a little bit faster. You can do a little bit more in the time allotted. It only take me 20 minutes to download the new Creed song back in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, and you had to be a lot more mindful. Like, you're right, you didn't have video chat and all that stuff. So we got really good at text messaging like back in those days and being a clear communicator. So I think when you shift to remote, you shift to digital. It's about not trying to force the in-person workflow on that digital way of working, right? Like, you need to think digital first, and you need to understand what tools are available to you. And there's so many good tools right now, right? Like, you can have automatic summaries of meeting and capturing action items and all that stuff. There's so many productivity tools out there for people that want to be remote first that I'm really happy that we can leverage.
Any specific tools that you started to utilize that you've noticed have made a really big difference in this?
It's some I love a tool that I just started using called Workflowy. It's so stupid. It's like a bullet list. Like, it's literally like a shared bullet list. And it's great for like listing tasks and listing like ideas and brainstorming in a sort of a structured, organized way. It's amazingly simple. It's like a supercharged notepad at the end of the day. But I just love it, and it just kind of helped me keep my thoughts in one place and organized.
Yeah, imagine I got so many freaking notebooks lying around. There's no organization to any of them. Just jotting. I was just going into a meeting. I'm just going to pick up this random notebook. Terrible. Have you noticed that is it easier or more challenging for an individual, an engineer, sales engineer, someone like that working remotely? Is it easier or more difficult for them to distinguish themselves, for them to set themselves apart from their colleagues as an exceptional employee?
I think that's a really good question. I think because you're right, you do take that in-person monitoring and that the manager might do, you take that part out of it. So, I can't see if someone is looking busy or not. But at the same time, maybe that's a good thing. And all I'm doing is actually focusing on their output. I think there's a lot of fear out there that like, oh, this employee is slacking and they're doing, 2-3 jobs simultaneously or something like that. I mean, we've heard those horror stories. I'm not sure how common that actually is. And I think if you have a good culture and you're communicating clearly across these tools and you're assigning tasks and all that stuff, I'm not necessarily that concerned. I think for software developers, it's very easy to see the work they're doing. All of it gets reviewed online, gets uploaded. It's like sort of notifications. I think, we're trying to implement similar workflow for people that work in just ops and accounting even, to make sure they use these sort of digital tools to not just so we can monitor their work, but just to kind of track and document their own workflows. And that's really important. So it's not just all institutional knowledge living in people's head. Because the problem is, one thing that I find is if all the important information is in one person's head, then, well, that person is never going to take vacation. You can't. So for me, it's really important for the organization to be resilient to people going on medical leave and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Is there any advice you would give somebody who is newer or starting out in a tech career on what they can do to try and set themselves apart?
Yeah, I think I get a lot of resumes that I come across, and it's like, yeah, I did this school project, and that might be great, and I was in robotics, and for me, often that doesn't do a whole lot. I'm not sure what part you did. I'm not sure how deep you went. I'm not sure what the teacher gave you versus what you did. If I'm hiring a software developer, kind of want to see code repositories. I highly recommend working on open source projects. You get to demonstrate, iteration. You get to demonstrate actually producing something. Solving homework problems in programming is pretty far from developing software for an industrial automation production environment. So I think that's what I'm looking for, sort of proof of real work, as well as just like real experience. Like, don't highlight the school you went to, highlight what you did at that recent job. That's kind of what I care about more than anything.
I was curious about asking you about that, about the future of education. It appears that you've been pretty lucky in continuing to be able to hire really good people. But it's a challenge for a lot of people out there. And with more boomers retiring than people entering the workforce and college continuing to get more and more expensive, do you see a future alternative to the tech sector where there are less and less requirements about people having a traditional 4-year education before entering the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, if we're getting to a state where all you're doing in that education is to prove that you're smart, and that you can solve problems, really got to question: are we getting our money's worth? I do believe it is important to learn basic STEM, science and math and things like that, and engineering, before you get too deep into the different applications. So I do believe there's a need for that. But I also know, things are moving so quickly in the tech sector. I believe in continuing education. If you think that you're going to go to school and then not learn anything else and apply that for the rest of your career, you're in for a pretty rough ride, because the reality is that, we're all learning as we go. And there's new tools that we all have to stay up to date on. Mm-hmm. And we have to be, you have to stay curious. And at least if you want to work on the cutting edge stuff, you want to work on the disruptive stuff. If you want to prioritize other parts of your life, you want to coast more at your job, you should go and get a different type of job. They still exist. For me, they're not rewarding, but for certain life situations, there's nothing wrong with that either necessarily. But mm-hmm. I think if you want to remain competitive, you want to command the highest salaries and work on the coolest stuff. You got to keep learning for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably the wrong person to ask, but you PhD in robotics, correct?
Correct, yeah.
But you also, this is obviously something you've been passionate about since you were a kid. I mean, you said it yourself. You're sitting in your bedroom at your parents' house at 13 writing code and programming and doing projects with friends just because you liked it. And so this is obviously something that drives you. Could you have gotten to the point where you're at without the formal education of receiving a PhD, or was that imperative to have those thought leaders showing you the way to get to where you are?
Yes, I'm going to be, very formal. It was a necessary but not a sufficient condition. That's what you would say in math, right? So it was an obvious stepping stone for me to be able to get where I am. A lot of these advanced degrees from fancy universities, they open doors. Whether we want it to be that way or not, that's the reality. It comes with, that diploma from University of Washington comes with a certain amount of privilege, and people are maybe going to give me that meeting that I might not get otherwise in certain situation. In other situation, I'm selling, working with some, integrator in Michigan. Frankly, they don't care, right? But maybe some investor would, right? So I think, your career is just kind of the sum of everything you've done. Some stuff like the academics is going to be advantageous when you're applying for grants from the government. That's going to be a lot easier with a PhD. I can tell you that, yeah. Right? Some of the other stuff is, that is really valuable to me right now. I mean, in working with industrial robots, I've kind of learned that on the job. So, and some of it, you're right. I learned it when I was 13. I don't think it's essential that you have this arc of like, hey, I've been passionate about this since I was 11. That's what happened in my case. I don't think that it has to be the case. I don't think it's necessarily ever too late to follow your passion and get into something new.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as for the future of the robotics and automation industries? What skills, talents, passions are going to be most imperative to the future of companies like yours and the companies that your product supports?
I think in industrial automation, I think we're going to see software and the software skills and the way people are working in software are going to start, permeating the industrial automation sector. We're seeing companies bringing versioning of code and things like that are starting to become mainstream now for, PLCs and robot programs. So I think there's a lot of good lessons learned from the software industry that can help accelerate innovation, frankly, and help accelerate new technology and help improve uptime of robots and things like that. So I think the days are over when we can completely think of these as separate disciplines. And you kind of have to start thinking holistically about it. That said, there's, you got motion, you got encoders, you got, motors and all that stuff. Those skill sets aren't going to go away either. But I just think it's going to be a much bigger field. We're going to need more people. We're going to need different people.
Well, I'd imagine that the software, the coding, the programming is getting significantly more complex so that the products are easier to use.
I think the idea is to make it complex for us such that we can build a product, you're right, that is easy to use. Such that the easy thing to do with our product is also the right thing and the safe thing and the safe, cyber secure thing. So that complexity, you're right. That generates more complexity for us and hopefully less complexity for our partners and our customers. I do believe there's a lot of work to be done there. It is quite intimidating to work with an industrial robot today if that's something you've never done. People are generally afraid of breaking $100,000 unit or something like that, when that's usually isn't that big of a risk that they actually would do that. So that puts a lot of more pressure to deploy products instead of technologies. And I think that's always an important distinction. A technology is something that you need to understand how it works to use it. A product, you just need to be able to use it. You don't need to necessarily understand all the stuff that's going on under the hood. And if we want to keep innovating faster, that's one of the key things, to have trusted building blocks that you can build and innovate upon.
Yeah, I wonder what that means for the future of robotics. I really enjoyed the article you shared by Sean Dotson recently, to humanoid is to air, and he's talking about the complexities of manufacturing and deployment of humanoid robots. And I wonder if that's going to translate even further, because these things are so complicated and so difficult to produce and so difficult to make efficient. Do you see that trend even continuing into more traditional manufacturing robotics, in that the robotics are going to almost continue to get simpler for end users to actually use, versus trying to create these big, complex, very intricate robotics components and systems?
Yeah, I think there are two parallel trends playing out right now. So you have the humanoid robots that are, building ever more complex robots that are more capable, supposedly can be among people and all that stuff. And then you have the other parallel trend, which is, let's not innovate with the robots. Let's make them actually simpler, so we have nice, predictable platforms upon which we can build software. Because if it's hard to scale and build software that scales out automation, that takes this from one prototype in a lab to 1,000 or 10,000 robots in the field, if the underlying hardware and technology and safety frameworks keeps shifting under our feet, right? So I do believe it's good that these trends are playing out in parallel. They're sort of pushing the hardware in one direction. Meanwhile, the industrial automation is actually more doubling down on this form factor and commoditizing that to some extent, to be honest, such that we can innovate on top of it. So I think it's too early to say where humanoids are going to go, what's going to happen, like Sean Dotson, how it's going to play out. It's still in infancy. There are lots of open questions that just kind of have to play out. I think it's going to take a fair amount of venture capital to actually sort that out. But if they get it right, it's going to be very interesting to see. That said, it's not going to kill the articulated robot arm as we know it by no means. That's my prediction.
So what does that mean for the future of the hiring workforce in the manufacturing industry? The age-old argument, robots are coming for my job. What do you see as that meaning for the future of the manufacturing industry?
Well, I think first of all, I'm not sure that many people are saying that anymore. I think the sentiment has sort of shifted. They know there's such a massive labor shortage that there's plenty of other stuff for me to do, even if a robot is an aspect of my job. Also, a robot is a very poor replacement for a person. If you're doing some physical work in a factory and you're lifting some stuff, you're clicking some screens, you're making some decision, you're interacting with some people, swapping that out for a robot right now it's essentially impossible, right? It would be at the skill level of less than a toddler, effectively trying to copy you. And I can tell you that, I have toddlers at home, that would not be a success. So I don't think that argument was ever true. That said, we should acknowledge that, yes, there are certain aspects of people's job that robots can do faster and maybe even safer. And even though the one-to-one replacement is not true, I believe that 10 people's jobs could potentially be replaced by 10 robots and one person working together. Right. So that's I think that ought to be acknowledged, that as long as there's a person supervising robots, that can potentially, replace jobs. But like I said, we've seen that companies that adopt robots, they in fact hire more people. The roles aren't necessarily but again, we got to acknowledge that roles aren't necessarily the same as they were before. But in fact, they're upskilling and they're hiring more people. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. So a robot isn't necessarily coming for a person's job, but they may be coming for a task. And if the task is highly repetitive, dirty, or dangerous, then yeah, it's possible. But there are so many other areas for growth and the implementation of robotics, that it's not coming for a job, but it may be coming for a task. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
But the reality too is that if you neglect, you say, okay, we're not going to have robots, and we're going to, invest only in people. You got to be aware that the alternative might be that a competitor might invest in robots and run you completely out of business. Now you have no jobs, right? So I think status quo, doing nothing is not really an alternative for anyone. Honestly, you gotta keep this into account. I'm not saying you gotta go all in on automation, but you gotta think in 2024. You gotta start thinking about it.
You don't got to go all in on automation. You do got to think about it. Fredrik, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate it. If somebody is interested in reaching out to you or finding out more about Olis, what's the best way for them to track you down and get in touch?
Well, so Fredrik Rydén on LinkedIn, olisrobotics.com. You can also get in touch with me, Fredrik at olisrobotics.com. Also, I'm going to be at the A3 Business Forum in January in Orlando. So if someone want to meet in person, that would be a good place to do it.
Well, I'll see you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much. Big thank you to Noah Cuff, our producer. This is going to be our last episode of 2023. So happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everyone out there, and we will see you in 2024. Thanks for listening.